that is absolutely core to the DNA of our church.
Wow,
We'll say that regularly. You'll hear that on a Sunday morning. We want to be a place where people can belong before they believe, or even be a place where people can belong if they never believe, because it is such a process sometimes, and just want to leave open space for people to come and explore, be curious, try to figure things out. We're all in it together, you know.
Welcome to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I'm your host, Rhiannon Rosalind. I'm a serial entrepreneur and social innovator. I like to gather people from all different walks to talk about what I call the conscious economy. I believe that we can create a more equitable system, one that honors the well-being of people, the well-being of the planet, the well-being of business, and includes art and creativity. Join us each week as we tackle a different intersection of this big but critical conversation. What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I'm your host, Rhiannon Rosalind, and today I am joined by an incredible guest. So I'm here with Pastor Jamie Holtom, who is the pastor at the Bramalea North United Church. Is that right? Or it's
North Bramalea United Church.
United
we go
Church.
NBUC for short, which makes it easier for everybody.
And you want to look that up. So it's the North Bramalea United Church. And I had the opportunity and the privilege to go and visit you at the church. So we'll get into that in a second. But I want to ground and anchor our audience right now for a moment in why we would be talking to a pastor on the Conscious Economics Podcast. And for me, I really believe that as we explore the new economy, we want to be able to understand how we can take what was traditional and bring it into the new, into the progressive, into the future. And I really think you are a visionary leader in that space. And so although it may be seem like it's a little bit outside of the box to be able to sit down with a pastor today, I think it's so important that we hear where different leaders in their own spaces are being able to create new and progressive identities and ideologies while still honoring tradition. And that is something that you do really well. So I'm going to paint the experience. I didn't know you. We have a mutual friend, and you were having me come onto your podcast. And so I'm thinking I'm going to a church and I'm meeting a pastor and I have a certain idea of what that is. And then I come into the space and I'm at first just taken aback by, the space itself, because I'm noticing that it's very progressive feeling. It's very diverse. You have all these different young people and it seems like there's all different cultures that are congregating. And then I see like some rainbow flags. And then I meet you and you pop out and you just have this incredible, vibrant energy and we instantly have a connection. And I feel so at home in your space and so at home in the conversation that we had. And I felt like I could be, I didn't feel like I had to hold back in terms of who I am or some of the darker, deeper experiences that I've been through. And we had this beautiful, beautiful conversation. And so with all of that anchoring, I want to first say thank you so much for coming on to our show now, because I was so taken by you and I was taken by the space you've created, because traditionally when we think about church and religion, we think of something more traditional. Maybe I know a lot of friends of mine who left going to church when they maybe understood their own sexual identity or they just felt like they didn't belong in that space. And so I want to understand how you as a leader maintain the religious tradition of the space while also embracing this progressive inclusion that I felt so deeply in your space. And I know that's a big question. So please tell us how you do that.
Oh, it's a great question. I just thank you, Rhiannon. I'm honored to be here and I felt the same about you. In fact, when you were just describing me, I felt like you were describing somebody else. But anyway, I'm glad to be here, honored to be here. I guess if I think back to like where my wife Katrina and I came from, we didn't grow up in a church environment. So for us, like we don't really have a lot of tradition. Yeah. So when we were looking for a church, when we were just exploring our own faith, we just felt a really good fit at NBUC, North Bramalea United Church, where there was just a sense of openness and inclusion. And we felt like we belonged before we even believed, if I could say, because we were still exploring and trying to figure things out. So that's kind of an important part of our history. We don't have a lot of church tradition. So probably if people are looking for a church with a lot of tradition, they probably come and are disappointed in our church, and that's okay.
I love that you said, though, like you were exploring a place to belong before you even knew if you believed. That to me is creating so much space for people, like just in exploring.
That is absolutely core to the DNA of our church. We'll say that regularly. You'll hear that on a Sunday morning. We want to be a place where people can belong before they believe, or even be a place where people can belong if they never believe, because it is such a process sometimes, and just want to leave open space for people to come and explore, be curious, try to figure things out. We're all in it together. You know, as far as just being a church that's more inclusive, that's been a huge part of our DNA. We have 3 core values: to be passionately Christ-centered, relentlessly reaching out, and radically inclusive. And part of that inclusiveness really is meant to include all people. We really, like, it comes from a conviction that we believe Jesus came for all people, that Jesus loves everyone. And because of that, so should we, so do we. And that's how we do it and why we do it.
So do you ever get any sort of friction between maybe some of these progressive values and people that are coming to the church expecting a more maybe traditional approach to biblical teachings? Or
absolutely. And great question. I can kind of give you an example on both sides. We as you mentioned, you came and you saw a rainbow banner out front, which is naming intentionally, explicitly, that we are open to people of all sexual orientations. Within a few weeks of having that banner up, we had a young person come on a Sunday morning, and it's just a tragic story to me. She is coming to an environment where she was told at a church where she'd been that because she was gay, that God didn't love her. And so I know it's even hard to even say. It's so far from what I believe, let alone who we want to be personally. And so just so grateful that she saw that. She came in on a Sunday morning, met one of our young leaders, and just really came to a different belief about herself, about God, about God's view of her. And that's partly why we wanted to be so clear and intentional about this. When we put that banner up, I really was just really excited about it. And I went outside that Sunday after church. I took a picture and posted on my socials. And I had some feedback from people who just maybe don't have the same beliefs that we do. I didn't go too far down that track because they're entitled to theirs. I just want to be really clear on what ours are.
Absolutely. But, you know, I appreciate that, because I think that any time as a leader, especially, and again, I know it's such a progressive space, but people have all of these attachments to what they think, you know, religion is, what they think a church is. And again, in this new world, in this new economy, we are creating the new. And so we need leaders who are willing to step out and say, this is core to not only my identity as a person, but also what I believe in, the way that I interpret, you know, the teachings of Jesus. And then be able to stand in that, even if there are, you know, people that are pushing back or don't understand, and standing in that inclusivity no matter what. And I think we always think about, you know, for anyone who wants to be an ally to someone else, or who wants to, it's in the times when there is the friction that you want someone to be able to stand true in that and solidly. And so I think that that's a beautiful thing to share. Now, I have a couple of questions because I want to know what are some of the biggest misconceptions about being a pastor. And, you know, this is your job. This is what you do. You create this space for people to be able to connect to, you know, to God. And I don't know. I have a very, very specific thing in mind of what I think that might be like. Like, you're never allowed to like have a bad day, or I don't know. Just, I'd love to hear what really it's really like. Yeah,
for sure. You know, and I'm still kind of learning, even though I've been doing this for 20 plus years, what people, I just do my thing. I just do what I'm called to do. But a couple of things I've seen over the years is, I think sometimes people are surprised that I'm just a normal person. Like, and I say that with humility, because some people might say I'm not normal, you know, but anyway, like, you know what I mean? Like I'm a little crazy, but I know so here would be an example. Years ago, we were living in a townhouse in Brampton, and somebody moved in a few doors down, and she was out on her front steps. So I just went over and said hi. We had a great conversation, great connection, just welcomed her to the neighborhood. And it came up, what do you do? And so I told her I was a pastor, and, you know, we had a kind of neat chat about that. And then we were done. I went on to go what I was doing. And I guess what I was doing was I hadn't taken empty beer bottles back for a long time. And so I'm moving out of the garage to the car, right? And I didn't have a ton, but I had a couple, whatever, right? And, you know, you can just feel sometimes like eyes on your back.
Totally.
As I'm doing, like, I think she's looking at me, and I look over, and she goes, I thought you were a pastor. I said, I am. And she goes, I thought pastors didn't drink. And I said, well, this one does. I don't know. And I think we laughed, sort of thing, but it actually took our relationship even deeper and further.
Absolutely.
And so I think that would be maybe a misconception that maybe not normal. So I'm a pretty normal guy, I think, for that, play sports, all these kinds of things. So that would be one. Another would be this misconception. I hear this all the time. Like, what do you do other than an hour on a Sunday morning? And I get that all the time. So I think that's a bit of a misconception.
Yeah.
I try to just gracefully, we used to, before COVID, we had a few services. I don't know, it's 3 hours, so we got 3 services, as I kind of joke around with it. But absolutely, it sometimes can be frustrating because, like, do you know what I do? But that's not,
totally.
That's not their problem. It's mine, and it's all good. But I think that's a misconception sometimes. Like, what does someone like myself do outside of a Sunday morning, outside of just the worship service? Because people see that's so visible.
Exactly.
But there's a whole system
host.
underneath all that.
You're literally
leading,
running a community.
Leading a staff, resourcing the mission, if you will. So there's lots that goes into that. But I think that's often a question people have and a misconception.
Wow. Yeah. I'm so glad you said all of the above. And again, I think that is the perception, or a lot of people hold this perception that those that are in a position like yours are somehow different than everybody else, and you're living a life that isn't kind of human. That it's like you're of God and there's nothing else. And I think that again makes it so relatable and approachable. I know when I think about coming to someone like a pastor to get some support or some help, I want to go to someone who understands what it feels like to be on the other side, so to speak.
I've got lots of those stories. I try to, it's not me being perfect, because I'm not, and those are most of the stories that I have because they're so real. I remember one Sunday after I told a story like that, I don't remember what the story was actually, but someone came up to afterwards and they said, what I love about your stories is it makes us feel like your life is as messed up as ours is.
Well,
that was an ultimate compliment for me, just to be real and authentic and genuine.
I love that. And that's how I felt around you, which I was surprised at first, but I was like willing to share deeper parts of my story because I felt so safe and like you can tell when someone's judging, and you can tell when someone is just not maybe perceptive to some of those pieces. And I just never ever got that impression from you. And that's not the kind of congregation that you're leading and that you're running. And I think that that's so evident and it's beautiful. So again, for anyone at home, and it may not be that, this is your exact path. Maybe you're not, going to a church, or maybe you have another place of worship that you go to, but being able to understand the human element behind the different people that are in your place of worship or practice, and understanding that we are all navigating this world together, and we are all trying to do the best we can in deciphering, meaning and connection to our higher power, God, Jesus, whatever that may be for you. So that's really beautiful.
Absolutely.
Hold that thought. We have a quick word from our partners before going back to the episode. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, RBC Investies. Backed by expert human advisors, RBC Investies is a smart, online, automated investment service that allows you to invest with low effort and low cost.
Open your first RBC Investies account and pay no management fees for your first year. Plus, start investing with as little as $100. Simply visit rbcinvesties.com/getinvesting and sign up using promo code AA407.
And now back to the episode. So obviously we had you on the show today. Typically we don't speak about religion and religious teachings. So I want people to understand that there's so much value in some of these teachings that can be applied to business, to the economy, to just everyday life. And I think that that's probably a misconception again, that we have to be living this particular religious life in order to derive value from some of these ideas, ideologies, teachings, stories. And so let's kind of blow that out of the water today. What are some of your favorite teachings that you like to apply to business, to the economy, to everyday life?
That's such a great question, because there's so much overlap. There's so much relevancy. And I would just want to also say that me, as someone who works in the church, I have so much to learn from good business practice, from good leadership. And so just love the cross connection there. I think for me, when I go back to Jesus, he all talked about servant leadership. He said, I came not to be served, but to serve, to give himself fully. And there's something really inspiring and challenging in that. And I think the best leadership practice comes when we can live into that ourselves, when we can be about others outside of ourselves, serve our customers, serve our staff, serve our world, and really lead in a way that tries to help bring that about. I think that leads to deeper things too, like character and integrity, walk the talk, do what we say we're going to do. Those for me can come out of a spiritual life where God is somehow working in me, absolutely a work in progress. I mess up every single day, but there's something called forgiveness and also a desire to keep working at those things. So just see that. I know many Christian business owners, and not that they have to be Christian to live these out, but I see an intentionality in their life where they really want to create a better world through what their business is doing, where it isn't just about making money. There's anything wrong with making money. It's what we do with that money when we are blessed to have it. And 100%. I see people wanting to run a very successful business so they can treat their employees well. So their employees, their staff can have great lives. Absolutely. So that they can give back to causes that we can work on together in the world. Like I love seeing that. There's even one more level of depth in my own personal practices. My life with God changes me. Far from perfect, as I said, but one that I'm working on these days. And when I say these days, it's probably been a few years, to be honest. But in James 1:19, it says, "Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." And for me, like I'm generally a high energy guy, so I can kind of walk in a room and talk before I listen. I'm really trying to ask not only more questions, but better questions, and be intentional with those, instead of going in thinking, here's what I'm going to say, here's what I need to learn, like here's what I want. So it's that humility that comes with that too, and the anger part would lead a whole different track, but just that sense of patience with myself, with people, with whatever we're doing. So those kinds of things, that's a huge, wherever you work, whatever you do, in your home even, these are important things, I think, that can make life better for us, but also for everyone else.
I love those teachings. I do think about it a little bit though, and I think of this idea of obviously in this show and our organization, the conscious economy is about being able to create business and products and services that are for this higher purpose, to heal each other, to heal the planet. Absolutely. So there is an alignment there, even though it may not be through religion per se that we look at the lens. There is this, and I think we are seeing a generation of young people that are more connected into these higher ideals, higher consciousness. Absolutely. But here's one challenge, and that is that a lot of the times when we're doing this work where we are being of service, and we are so passionate about the cause that we're serving, sometimes we can overgive and not take care of ourselves. And even that, particular teaching with Jesus sort of saying that, I think sometimes people can misconstrue that like, it has to all go out here and it can't go in here. And a lot of people in service work and a lot of people in the not-for-profit space and charitable space or running social enterprise and conscious business, they burn out and then they can't give. So does Jesus have anything to say about that?
No, that's a great, absolutely. Like there is story after story in scripture where Jesus went away to rest, where he went away to pray, where he went away to get on his own, and he took the disciples, his followers, his team with him. And so he models that like in a huge way. So there's definitely, there's this mindset, this heart set, if you will, of serving and being selfless and giving, but there's absolutely a practicality around that of resourcing oneself to be able to do that.
Of course.
Yeah,
and I think that's so important because otherwise we will be quick to anger or we will be quick to those things. And that's something I've even noticed in myself when I haven't given myself the things that I need. I actually can't serve in the way that ideally I want to, but I actually I'm under-resourced in whatever way.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And I guess for me, it's that spiritual, that time of prayer and reflection and just being quiet for me that reveals often those incidents in my life where maybe the day before I was sharp, I was quick, I was overly frustrated more than I needed to be. And there would have been a day where I would wouldn't have noticed that. But these days, by God's grace, I'm recognizing more and more, encouraging people around me to also let me know when this happens, and then recognizing it's time where I need to go for an extra run, or I need to take a break. I need to take a day off. I need to go golfing or do something that, again, fills me, so that just being more aware of that stuff. Even that for me is a kind of a spiritual process, if you will. Yeah. Great question. Yeah.
I love, to invite people into being able to be more conscious of themselves, conscious of their surroundings, their communities, the planet. And to me, I would define myself as a spiritual person, but maybe not a religious person per se. And that's because we'll get into this, but I've had my own kind of things that have happened with religion, I guess. So I want to understand from a pastor's perspective, what do you see the difference is between spirituality and religion, and how would you define those terms?
Well, in an ideal world, those get brought together really well, but I think sometimes they are kind of separate, and people experience those as separately. And I'm not always sure what people mean when they say that, so I try to ask more often these days. So just can I get a sense of what you mean when you say I'm spiritual but not religious? And I find that's been really helpful for me to get a deeper understanding of what's going on in people's lives, and where they're coming from, what they're actually saying. I've had some experiences over the years where this gives me a bit of a sense, I think, what people mean. So I am privileged to do funerals for people when they lose a loved one, and it's just it's such a sacred space. It's just so an amazing experience to share with somebody. But I've had people say, hey, when you do the service, can you make sure it's not too religious? And I'm not sure what people mean, so I'll say, just absolutely, I'll do my very best for that. Can you tell me what you mean by that? And I've had this on several occasions where someone will say, well, we were at a funeral, and the person that was leading it did this kind of altar call thing where they said, hey, if you believe in Jesus, then you're going to be saved and go to heaven. If you're not, you're going to hell. And they said, we just don't want that. I said, oh my goodness. Well, let me just say, I would never do that to you. It's literally, that feels like someone doing that to you, especially in an environment like that. And then I'll kind of back that up with, what if I did something like this? What if I talked about your loved one and just tried to look for where we see God in your loved one's life and celebrate that, and maybe even challenge us to be inspired by that, because perhaps that's what God's encouraging us to do a little bit more in our own lives as well. And then just offer some sense of hope that we don't know exactly, there's no blueprints of what happens when we die, but some sense of this eternal love and care that goes beyond this existence. And it's like, oh yeah, so for me in those moments, like, okay, that's a very real example of open to spiritual, open to God, open to faith, open to hope, love, new life, like these things. Absolutely, exactly. But not so much maybe some of the baggage that has come with it. And I think there's a human piece sometimes around religion that can really be hurtful, where people have been damaged and hurt. And I'm really, really sorry about that. I don't know that it always reflects who God really is from my perspective. The other piece I just say is sometimes I think there's a difference between rules and regulations, which can sometimes, I think people have experienced that in religion, where there's a strictness and it's all about what we can't do as opposed to what we can. I've certainly heard that and even felt that myself before, where spirituality is more of an openness to things, like, as you say, beyond ourselves, to relationships. So maybe rules versus relationships a little bit in there, relationships to God or Creator or Jesus or Holy Spirit, however we frame that from our experience, but also openness to relationship with others as well. And deepening that.
It's so interesting because a lot of these things that you're saying are definitely bringing up lots of things in me. So I definitely grew up in a household that was religious, and, I grew up going to church, a United Church, when I was younger. And then I had family members that were definitely, identified as Christian and were doing that. And I went to Huntley Street Christian Camp when I was a kid and all of these things. But there did come a point in my life where I broke away from some of it, and I felt as though, and I think a lot of people listening at home, depending on, where they're coming from or some of the things that they've heard about, even in the news per se or whatever, where religion is used as this tool to, it almost feels like manipulate people. And, you know, I think of just what's happening right now with the residential schools and the discoveries of the residential schools, and that being led by the church, and what that feels like to our Indigenous listeners that are listening, and like making those connections. And historically, we do know that church and state were very much combined, and that there was a politicization of religion. And I know this is getting kind of maybe deep philosophical in terms of what we're talking about, but I think this new age or new generation is finding less to reach for, to grab in religion, maybe because of some of that baggage and that history. And maybe there's a misconception of where new leaders like yourself are going and are taking this. And so, for me, spirituality is the exploration of one's spirit. And it's like the same idea as psychology when we're, you know, interested in studying our psyche. For me, spirituality is just, I'm interested and enthralled and on this path and journey of understanding the spirit of myself, the evolution of my own spirit and of other people's spirits around me, and exploring that through the lens of all religion, and understanding that no matter if you're, you know, praying to Jesus or if you're, you know, believe in Buddha or whatever else, there's this idea of these enlightened beings that walked the earth and the planet, that we're able to tap into these higher ideals, higher consciousness, and that we too have that ability within ourselves. And so I may not need the structure of religion to explore it, but I welcome that as a part of it, but not the only part of it. And so that's sort of where I'm finding my way. But I don't know, what do you feel in terms of some of that baggage and maybe the politicization of religion, and how that may have been used in the past? No, it's unfortunately very real. I think it's important to name it, you know, and I think it's easy, especially for people of faith, to get defensive, you know, and I totally understand that human tendency. I have it too. But I really think acknowledgement is probably the first step to recognize that some of these things historically really have happened and they're not good. And acknowledgement would lead to an apology, I think. And could sometimes still be happening, like that young girl who came to your congregation and said like she was told God didn't love her. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. You can do a quick search of the news and you can see places close to home and around the world where things are happening that, like, oh, that doesn't represent the Jesus who I'm trying to follow. Is what happens in my heart when I see those things. So I think historically also, absolutely some things happen now, to acknowledge those, to apologize for those. And I know sometimes it's hard to apologize for something people think that we haven't done, but I think if you're wanting to represent the faith that you're a part of, it's a really important thing to do. And then I guess to move it towards some kinds of action, like to bring a change to those things. And I think that's really important: acknowledgement, apology, and action. And then I guess for me, there's also a humility in trying to look at what's happening in today's world, because to give to honor in some ways those people maybe who did some things that were wrong, very wrong. My hope would be that wasn't their intent. You know, that people had the best of intentions, but can still get things very wrong. When we think about racism, we think about gender equality, like there's things that, like, were they bad people? I hope not, but definitely something needed to change, right? So I guess for me, it's like, okay, well, if those were good people, presumably then, and we're good people now, trying to do our very best, what are we doing? And I don't know what the answer is, but what are we doing today that one day our kids, grandkids, great-grandkids are going to say, holy cow, I can't believe they thought that, believed that, behaved that way. For me, it's just a matter of trying to be open to where are we missing, and just, you know, offer that. There's a passage of scripture that says, do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. And I think that's sometimes the best we can do, living into the present and the future as well, is to really try to do good, to try to bring kindness, to try to love, to try to love in all kinds of different ways. And when we do that, hopefully that will offer people another lens into what could be. Well, and I'm so grateful for you even being willing to answer these questions and have this conversation, because again, it's we can't go to where we want to go without exploring
Absolutely.
where maybe we have been that hasn't been so great. And we're all human beings, and we all have this spectrum inside of us that exists, and we're all capable of incredible, amazing things. And we're all capable of sometimes letting ourselves down in terms of how we may show up. So I think it's the acknowledgement and it's the understanding that, you know, whether it's religion or whether it's business or whatever, not all things are good or bad. And I think that happens a lot even with business, where people are like, just all business is evil, or everyone that's doing this is greedy. And like, there's these misconceptions.
Absolutely.
And so it's allowing more of that spectrum, more of that gray to open up, where we can explore these things and realize that human beings have been behind all of these expressions and interpretations right now, and we are not perfect. And so that is what it is. For those that are watching at home that may want to cultivate a spiritual or you know, attempt to learn a little bit more about religion, how would you advise somebody to do that? And does it have to be in a church setting, or what does it look like for you?
Sure. No, I mean, absolutely not. It doesn't have to be in a church setting. Obviously, I believe in what I'm doing, and I think there's a way to grow with other people that is hard to get if you don't connect in at some point. But you got to make sure it's the right community. It's got all these things that we've talked about. Like there's good doctors, bad doctors, good, you know, good churches, bad church. Ones that, anyway, I'll just stop there. But
I get it. I get it.
I think if we go back to that spiritual life, that life with God, that can and does happen everywhere. I think a church community, if it's working right, can really be a place where it can foster that and enable that. For many, it's hard to do that on their own, but I wouldn't want to be limited by that at all. And so I think just to encourage people, start where you are. You know, if you start to run, you don't start running a marathon. You start where you are, and I think the spiritual life can be very much the same way. I'd encourage people to ask someone who you see living into some of these things, and what do you do? What is your prayer life like? And you might pick up some things that can actually help you, because there are tools that can help us do. Sometimes we get inspired to do something, but we're not sure how. And so I think there's people that can help us on the how-tos. Lectio 365. It's an app that is a beautiful 10-minute devotion that is as good as any that I've ever seen.
365?
It's called Lectio 365. Lectio, Lectio 365. It's Christian-based. It uses scripture. It's very reflective. It's about mission and justice and mercy. And I think people would find it, it's well beyond the walls of a church. You know what I mean?
Cool.
It's about it's really good.
Very techy there, Jamie. Very technologically advanced religion.
Oh, thanks, Rhiannon.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming and being a part of this and having this conversation and answering some of these more difficult questions. And for those of you that are listening at home, if you are loving Pastor Jamie and want to get involved with what he's doing and what he's building, we'll link some links in the show notes so that you can check that out. And for those of you that may not feel that religion is necessarily where you want to explore right now, I do invite you to explore how you can take some of these higher ideals, these higher conscious ideas, to apply them into business, to apply them into your art, to apply them into the way that you interact with people. So I think that there's lots that we can gain from sitting down with different leaders from all around and being able to extrapolate those great lessons and apply them into our everyday lives. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us. And we'll see you again next week on the Conscious Economics Podcast.
Thanks, everyone.
This podcast is brought to you by CPP Investments. At CPP Investments, they never lose sight of the long term. They invest the Canadian Pension Plan Fund to help provide financial security for generations of Canadians.
They diversify the CPP fund across geographies and asset classes to access the best investment opportunities and generate sustainable long-term returns. The fund is now more than $400 billion.
To learn more about their investment performance for Canadians, visit cppinvestments.com.